back, everybody. This is the City Spotlight Show with your host, Harry Smith, News Director for KHTS AM 1220, and I'm here in the studio with Frank Oviedo, our Assistant City Manager, and Rick Gould, our Director of Arts, Parks, and Recreation. And where we left off talking about all things Santa Clarita was, kind of some of the projects that are happening with the Parks and Recreation and Community Services. One of the things that I thought was interesting was there was a huge development with the Open Space Preservation District in the last couple of weeks. Let's first talk about what is the Open Space Preservation District and how does that benefit our city? Because I think maybe a lot of people hear it or they talk about green belts, but they don't really understand what it means.
Well, let me take a couple of steps back long before the Open Space Preservation District really started. One of the City Council's goals many years ago was to acquire land around the city to create a green belt. And by a green belt, which is probably a little bit brown today because it's the summertime, but in the winter it's certainly green, is an area that is not developed. You don't see homes being built up hillsides. There's not a lot of grading and that type of stuff going on. And the idea is if we could put that kind of a green belt around the city, it provides us a buffer between us and other communities, notably the Los Angeles Basin. It provides us a recreational opportunity to go out into those open spaces, and there's a lot of other benefits to it as well. And so the council made that a priority many years ago. And we had been working for years to acquire land in that regard. And there are a variety of ways that we get land. We get it through donations, either from a developer or from private sources that want to donate it to us from an estate. We can get grants from the state of California to acquire land. And we've been, plugging along. We had several thousand acres in a variety of different kinds of holdings. But we knew, and the council knew, back in the middle part of the last decade, that they really wanted to accelerate the efforts. And so they proposed to the residents an open space preservation district. And that district, the sole intent of it would be to go out and acquire this land and create the green belt around the city. And so we went out to the voters in 2005 and 2007 and proposed this open space preservation district. And the district is essentially a payment that every property owner makes to the city of about $30 a year currently. And the sole purpose of that money is to acquire and maintain open space in this green belt around the city and in the important wildlife corridors that the city has, which include the Santa Clarita River. And so since about 2007, we've been actively pursuing acquisition of land that fits that general description. Yeah, go ahead, Harry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, does that city land necessarily have to be within city limits, or it's a buffer? When you say it's a buffer around the community, how does that kind of fit into the city's goals? It
typically is not within the city when we acquire it. It is typically immediately adjacent to the city, just outside the boundaries. When we acquire it, very frequently we annex it into the city for a variety of different reasons. It just makes more sense from a planning perspective. But yeah, we're typically acquiring this land in the hills around the city limits, and that's the majority of the types of acquisitions that we're doing.
And so a lot of times it's canyons, it's just kind of, it's open, like you're saying, open space. There's no development on there. There allowed to be property on that development when you acquire it, like if it's donated from somebody?
Typically, the land we get doesn't have any kind of development on it at all, other than an occasional ranch house or something like that, and then we sort of make a determination of how we're going to use it. A good example of that is Whitney Canyon Park, which is at the end of Newhall Avenue at the 14. There was a ranch house there, which is now currently occupied by a ranger from the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority. That was a piece of land jointly purchased between the city and the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, and so one of their rangers sits there and patrols that 442 acres, which when I say 442, you don't think, 442, how big is that? Right. When you go out and look at it, that's a big chunk of land. That's as big as any, probably the whole town center area all the way, up into the North Valencia area. It's a big chunk of land. So.
And yeah, you were mentioning the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. You guys have some partners that you work with to develop this open space preservation district, right?
Yeah, we really do, and we rely on our partners. That was one of the important things about passing the open space preservation district. We told the voters at the time that we would leverage any money that they provided us with our partners, the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, the County of Los Angeles, especially through Proposition A, the Wildlife Conservation Board from the state of California, the Fish and Wildlife Service. There are a variety of sources that we try to pull from, and by leveraging what money we have, we essentially become a granting agency along with them. We pool our money together, and we can then go out and buy these lands that might be out of our reach financially, But, having partners in those purchases really extends the ability of the district to meet that goal of having a green belt.
Sorry. As the director of the Parks, Community Services and Recreation, at what point do you look at that land and say, okay, maybe that it might be appropriate for a park there, or are you allowed to put a park on that land, or?
Well, we look at parks in lots of different ways, and, there's what I would call a passive park, and there's an active park. And an active park is where you've got to send a lawnmower out there, or you put a bathroom in, there's sports fields, who knows what it is. Sure. In general, the district was targeted at acquiring the passive type of parkland, which would be more suitable for wildlife. It's a wildlife corridor, very little development, trails, maybe, maybe some drinking fountains in the long run, maybe a restroom or something, but really, intended for very low use intensity. The district does allow us to use a small portion, about 10% of the funds, to buy land for an active park. Okay. To date, we haven't found a place that is something we want to spend the money on. That doesn't mean it won't happen, and probably will at some point. But our focus mostly right now, especially with the types of land that is coming forward to us, has been on the open space acquisition and trying to buy some of those parcels that have been slated for development. And that's some of the activity that you talked about at the top of this segment that we've been focusing on most recently.
And we'll certainly get to that. Just a quick question about the Central Parks. I know when I was talking to Mayor Keller, they were saying that there's going to be some more fields on there. At that point, are we still looking at, kind of which fields we're going to put there in the planning phases for that, as far as at Central Park?
We're well through the planning phases.
Okay.
We actually received bids, very favorable bids for construction. And so as you enter Central Park right now, we'll be adding 2 fields just south of the community garden area. A place where some people park for concerts in the park right now. It'll be 2 new multi-use sports fields. They'll be lit with about 170 more parking places.
Oh, good deal.
We should be going to construction on that in September, early October.
Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Open Space Preservation District and the city's huge gain there when we get back from our commercial break. This is the City Spotlight Show with your host, Perry Smith, and on your hometown station, AM 1220 KHTS.